Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2.
The mic then through the chat. Good. I'm good. I don't know. I might call you up to cover for it. I read the book. Oh yeah, we delivered our first at that hospital, so fun memories. Nothing quite like leaving the hospital. It's 104 degrees at midnight. It was cute. It was just like a crazy day. Brutal. That wall of heat, so oppressive.
Well, good evening, everyone. So good to see such a great crowd out here. We've got, I think we've got representatives from just about every sector of the university and the community, so we're pleased to have you, faculty, staff, students. I see basketball players, student athletes, trustees. So thank you all for joining us for a very special evening here with Adam Grant. We actually are pleased on a couple perspectives this evening. One, this is the official launch of the One Butler Creativity Project. We're building upon, many of you are familiar with a program started last year thanks to the leadership of the College of Education called One Butler, the Brain Project, which was a very successful series of programs, events, speakers last year. We were able to draw from different areas of the university and the community and allowed us to do a deep dive across a topic that really turned out to be quite a great launch for the One Butler program. As we talked about how we were going to top that, which was not going to be an easy thing to do, we settled upon creativity. We thought that that was a great way to build and connect upon some of the things that we learned last year with the Brain Project. And so we've had a group of people under the leadership of our Associate Provost, Michelle Jarvis, who's over there, and you're going to hear a little bit later at the end of the program from her about this. Her and Melissa Beckwith have been convening with different groups talking about ways that we were going to move forward this year. And an interesting thing that happened is I was with Michelle Jarvis at our new faculty dinner at my house, which was only about 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And I'm outside talking to Michelle, and I asked her because just the Friday before, a group of about 50 people across the university gathered, and they did a terrific morning of brainstorming about things that they could do to get this program started this year and really have a very effective series of events. And as I'm talking to her, I said, you know, Michelle, which would be really cool, we need a big splashy kickoff. And one person who would be really good is Adam Grant. Have you ever heard of him? And so I wanted to prove that he was really good. So I do what a lot of people do. I went in to find his book. Because, you know, when you have a book, you must be credible. And as you'll find out tonight, Adam is very credible. And so I go in to get this book, and I snuck a peek at my email. And there was an email from Adam Grant, who I vaguely might know in the past. We do have some points of intersection. And I just found it so weird, you know. In fact, I talked to Adam earlier. I said, I was looking through your book to see if there's something that explains that phenomenon. You're talking to somebody about, we should have somebody like Adam Grant. Then you go in and look at an email, and you've got an email from him. And he, as you'll hear tonight, he's here to work on a project instigated a bit from Brad Stevens and focused on the Butler way. So we're excited to have that. So I wrote him the next day, told him that story, and he says, well, I'm landed at 5 o'clock. How about we do it tonight? And so that led to tonight, which we've pulled together in about 3 weeks' time. And it could not... we could not be more fortunate. I really am a big fan. Adam is such a successful individual in so many ways, and it's actually the one time I've got to really look at my notes because he's got so many things that he's done, and he told me to keep it brief, but I really have to kind of tell a few things. He's certainly considered one of the world's top 25 most influential management thinkers, a leading expert on how we can find motivation and meaning and live more generous and creative lives. He is, in his relatively short and illustrious career, he's received recognition for distinguished scholarly achievement from the Academy of Management, the American Psychological Association, and the National Science Foundation. He's been named the Wharton School's top-rated professor for 6 consecutive years. He's the author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, including the originals, which is the book I was showing Michelle. And recently, I'm sorry, apologize for this, I don't have a podium here. Got it. Plan B, which he's co-authored with Sheryl Sandberg. Adam earned his PhD in organizational psychology from the University of Michigan in less than 3 years. He's got a BA from Harvard University, magna cum laude, with highest honors. He is the youngest person ever to be granted tenure at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. So, there's a lot there. There's a lot more on his website if you get a chance to take a look at it. But we are really honored to have Adam Grant here this evening to kick off One Butler Creativity. Adam?
Good evening, everyone. I want to take you back about 20 years. It's 1998, and there's a group of students who get into Harvard, and they decide that they need to connect the entering class online. So they start doing searches on this state-of-the-art search engine called Ask Jeeves, and nothing comes back, and then they go into America Online, and they begin searching profiles, and they discover that they can find a few other students who are seemingly also going to arrive at Harvard. And so they start a little email list, and then they begin realizing, you know, we could actually connect the class. And so it starts in January, and then by April, they've got over 100 people on their list. Some of them meet up in person. By the time they arrive for their freshman year of college, they have over an eighth of the class connected online. And so they've created Harvard's first online social network. This is 5 years before Mark Zuckerberg dreams up Facebook. And then they decide to disband the network because they all know each other face to face, and they don't need the online connection anymore. Now, I ran into a couple of those co-founders recently, and they are deeply regretting their decision. I know this because I was one of them. I co-founded that email group, and it never occurred to me to do a single thing with it. And I've spent a lot of the time since then sort of kicking myself and wondering why I have such poor judgment. Of course, I would never have started Facebook. I'm not a coder. I don't know anything about technology. It certainly didn't have Mark's vision for where that should go. But I wondered how many people have been in those shoes, right? Where you had an idea that could improve the world around you, and then you just sat on it and let somebody else run with it. And instead of going and doing that, I was incredibly risk averse. And so I went and took a very secure job in advertising. And eventually I was supposed to hire a team, and I brought in this guy that I thought was going to be a genius. He had spoken 6 languages fluently, self-taught. He was extremely creative, and then he came in and he fell way behind on a major deadline. And I watched the senior leader in the organization come over to his desk and start screaming at him. And she said, "If you don't get your act together, you're going to be fired." And I'm watching this happen, and I have a choice to make. Do I speak up or do I stay silent? And I know my whole life I've been the person who stayed silent. In elementary school, I got called to the principal's office. I got there, I found out I was not in trouble, and I still cried. After that trauma, I not only followed all the rules, I also made a list of all the rules that might one day exist, and I followed those too, just in case. But I felt like I had to do something in this situation, so I looked around the organization, and I found the person who I knew would have my back. It was my boss's boss. She had nominated me for an award once. She would drop by my desk every week to talk about Survivor, which meant I had to watch Survivor. And I thought, okay, this is safe. So I march in and I say, look, terrible injustice. Nobody should ever be treated this way. But I'm also worried that the guy's going to quit. And if you think we're behind on a deadline now, just wait until he leaves. Deep breath, I got it out. Except then my boss's boss starts dragging me down the hallway and shoving me into a dark room. The light goes on, I'm totally disoriented. I'm somewhere I've never been in my entire life, in the center of the women's bathroom. Turns out, this is the only room on our floor with no windows. And my boss's boss proceeds to tell me that if I ever speak out of turn again, I'm going to be fired. So that led me to a few decisions. The first one was that I was never going to have a real job where someone could fire me. This was the draw of university tenure, clearly. At least I think no one can fire me. The second decision was I was going to go and become an organizational psychologist and figure out how we could create cultures and teams where people were able to speak up instead of getting silenced, and whenever they had ideas and suggestions, they might actually get heard. And that's a lot of what I've been doing since then. And then the third goal was to never again enter a women's restroom. Check. So I guess over the last 15 years, I've been trying to, in part, study people that I've come to call originals. And originals are the opposite of me. They're the non-conformists, the ones who are comfortable taking risks, who are willing to stand out and speak up, who drive a lot of the creativity and change in our universities, in our companies, and our governments. And I wanted to know how we could all become a little bit more effectively original, and also how do we create cultures where originality flourishes. And so what I wanted to do today was bring you the top 10 things that I've learned, but sadly I can only think of 5. So it's going to be a top 5 list. Are you ready? Are you ready? Well, I was going to do it anyway, but I appreciate the Butler enthusiasm. So I've got to tell you that the key insight for me is that we do not lack creative ideas, right? All of us have ideas for how we can improve our environments, our workplaces, our schools. What we lack are people who know how to champion their ideas effectively. And so that's what I really want to focus on today. Think of this as a sequel to creativity. After you have an idea, what do you do with it? How do you get other people to take you seriously? And so the first thing that I learned came from an entrepreneur named Rufus Griscom. Rufus became a father, and he learned that most of what he'd been told about parenting was a complete lie. After one too many days of being outsmarted by his 3-year-old, he said, I'm going to start a company. It's going to be a blog that tells people the truth about parenting. He called it Babel, and he went around to venture capitalists and started pitching it. And in his pitch, he did something I'd never seen before. He said, hey, I've got this idea for this blog, and I just want to let you know there are 3 reasons why you should not invest in my company. And the investors were like, what? Why would you do that? You're trying to get me to give you money, and you're telling me why I should not give you money. Thank you for doing my homework for me. But he keeps doing it, and weirdly, he gets $3.1 million in funding that year, despite the fact that you'll never see this tactic on Shark Tank. Now, 2 years later, he starts to get some calls from companies that want to acquire Babel. And he goes to pitch to them, and he includes a slide in his pitch deck that says, here are the 5 reasons you should not buy Babel. And he lists them out. And it gets acquired for $40 million. So something's working here, and part of this is it's an attention-grabbing device. It's a marketing gimmick. You hear this, and you're like, wow, this guy's definitely a non-conformist. No one normally pitches that way. I wonder what he's going to say next. And you get a little bit curious. Part of it is, he's willing to talk openly about the flaws of his company. Maybe that signals you can trust him a little bit more when he talks about the strengths of his company. it makes them a little more credible. But I think the most interesting part is that he capitalizes on a bias. It's called the availability bias. Those of you who are Danny Kahneman fans, you might know it. The basic idea is that when something is easy to think of, we assume that it's true. When something is hard to think of, it feels like it's probably false. And I want to illustrate this, actually. I need a couple volunteers. So please raise your hand if you're willing to volunteer. All right, we've got one over here and a second over here. Okay, first person, what's your name? Nicole, thank you for volunteering. You're going to regret this. No, I'm just kidding. The next person will. Nicole, can you tell us three good things about your life, please?
Great friends, fantastic alma mater.
Keep going.
Oh, thanks. Great hair. Love it.
All right, I'm a little envious of that one, but thank you, Nicole. A round of applause for Nicole. And who's our other volunteer? Somewhere over here-ish. Yes, right there. What's your name? Ben. Ben, could you please give us 37 good things about your life?
Okay, well, I've got skateboarding and get to class on time. I am getting decent grades. I have two parents who love me a lot, and
Notice they came in third and fourth, by the way. Behind the skateboard. All right, I'm going to let you pause there. Round of applause for Ben. Now, when I started doing this, I assumed that the people who were going to name more good things should be happier with their lives. But when people were randomly assigned to do either 3 things or more, the 3 things group was significantly happier when asked how good is your life. And this is the availability bias in action. Because naming 3 good things about your life is pretty easy. You're like, boom, boom, boom. How good is my life? Well, that was simple. My life is pretty great. Meanwhile, poor Ben is struggling on number 5. And when then he's asked, like, how good is your life? He's like, not that good. Now, Ben, don't worry. The way you reverse this after tonight is you do this with bad things. And if you have to come up with 3 things that you hate about your life feels infinitely bad because most people can do that. But if you even have to come up with 10 bad things about your life, you have to work a little harder at that. My life is actually pretty decent. So that's your homework after tonight. But this is exactly what Rufus Griscom does to his investors. When he says, here are the 3 reasons you should not invest in Babel, he makes it harder for them to come up with their own objections. And the harder they have to work to think of reasons why Babel is not a good investment, the more Babel seems like a good investment. The other thing is, if you know your venture capitalists, they love to show off how brilliant they are. And the normal way they would do that is they would say, Rufus, I'm really sorry to interrupt you in your first sentence of your pitch, but here are the 3 reasons why your company is doomed. But he's already covered those bases, and so they can't do that. And instead, they pivot. They're like, you know what, Rufus, those 3 flaws you pointed out, those are nothing. I've already figured out how to fix them. And by the end of the pitch, they've talked themselves into thinking that this idea is actually not that bad. Now, this is something you are all taught to do if you ever studied debate, for example, right? You're supposed to identify the weaknesses in your argument, address the counter-arguments out loud, but we forget to do it when we're pitching new ideas because we think they're fragile and we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. But it actually does make you more credible, right? To be able to say, look, here's this idea, here's why I'm excited about it. I recognize it has the following limitations, and I'd love to talk about how to resolve those. Now, of course, there are times this might not work, and one of those would be in a job interview. But you know what? We have data that even in job interviews, recruiters are 30% more likely to want to give a job offer to somebody who answers the weakness question honestly, as opposed to saying, like Michael Scott from The Office, yeah, I have weaknesses, I work too hard and I care too much. So if it works there, I think it could work just about anywhere. Now, the second thing that I learned about communicating original ideas is the more original your ideas are, the harder it is for other people to grasp them and appreciate them. And I want to do an exercise to illustrate why that is and also maybe a little bit about how to overcome it. So what I'd like you all to do is think of a song, any song that you know, and then what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to clap the tune of that song and see if the person next to you can guess it. And you may not use any Butler fight songs, because it'll be too easy. But any other songs are fair game, so think of your song, you're going to clap it, person next to you try to guess it, and then trade roles. You have 1 minute, I wish you luck, you're going to need it. Go. All right, your minute is up. Those of you who are still clapping, there's a name for the trap you're falling in. Psychologists call it escalation of commitment to a losing course of action. But keep trying. Can I have you stand up if you guessed it correctly? We want to know who you are. On your feet if you guessed it right. That is an impressive number. Congratulations. Wait, stay on your feet. I'm not done with you yet. Stay on your feet, please. You can sit down when I name your song. So happy birthday, have a seat. Row, row, row your boat. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The ABCs. Jingle bells. Mary had a little lamb. London Bridge is falling down. Another one bites the dust. How about We Will Rock You? My personal favorite. What do we have? Fly Me to the Moon? Hot Cross Buns. I have memories of playing that on my recorder in 4th grade. Thank you for that. All right, so I have to say I'm really glad to be back home in the Midwest where people actually enjoy this exercise. I did it in Boston recently, and people just looked like they were about to enter a Freddy Krueger movie. Sorry, Tracy. But the real reason I had to do this is because for those of you who have roommates or kids or nieces or nephews or grandkids, when they ask you what you did tonight, this is your answer. But this is a real study done years ago where before people had to clap their songs, they had to estimate the probability that others would recognize the song. And I used to have people do this out loud. And I was giving a talk one day, and I said, all right, shout out your probability estimate. And I heard a voice. It was really loud and distinctive, and it said, 100%! And let me just apologize for this in advance, but my first thought when I heard that was, that's just stupid. Nothing is ever 100%. This guy does not understand the concept of probability. And I look over, and it's the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon. Now, luckily, the guy next to him guessed the song right. Very good news for all of us. But most of the time, when people give high estimates, they turn out to be way off the mark. So the average person says 50%. The correct guessing rate is only 2.5%. Why are we so overconfident? Why do we think it's going to be 1 in 2 when it's really 1 in 40? Well, I think you already know the answer. In order to clap your song, you have to hear the tune in your head. Right? It's impossible to do it otherwise. And that makes it also impossible to imagine what your disjointed clapping sounds like to someone who's not hearing the tune in their head. Right? So I'll give you my version of this. Here's the song that I tried. Shout it if you know. Star Wars, duh. It's the Imperial Death March, Darth Vader. Every time I do that, I am convinced that the entire audience is going to know it. Because what I'm hearing is dun, 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 dun. This is going to be easy. And meanwhile, those of you who are not Star Wars geeks are just hearing, what the hell is that? I think this is a great metaphor for what happens when we communicate original ideas to other people. Which is, when you bring a new idea to the table, you are not only hearing the tune in your head, you actually wrote the song. You have spent days or weeks or years thinking about this idea. It makes perfect sense in your head. And that makes it tough to fathom what it's going to sound like to somebody who's hearing it for the first time. which is why when we look at people bringing new ideas to the table, we see a lot of reactions that look like this. It's funny because it's true. And I think the data, if you look at this, actually show it takes 10 to 20 exposures to a new idea before other people really start to appreciate it. So the next time you have what you think is a great idea and other people don't get it, just look at your watch, wait 6 minutes, and then say, here it is again! Okay, no. That doesn't work at all. But what you do need to do is master the art of repetition, which is all about taking your unfamiliar idea and making it feel familiar. Like the first time people hear it, it feels as familiar as the 15th or the 16th. And there's a great example of that at Disney years ago, where they were making animated movies, and the way they did it was they had a formula. They say, we take a fairy tale, we adapt it to the silver screen, and then poof, it's a blockbuster. And then one day, somebody comes into Disney and is like, uh-oh, one day we're going to run out of fairy tales. We got to learn how to write. So they sit down and write their first original script for an animated movie, and no one likes it. Jeffrey Katzenberg laughs at it, and he says, this is a B movie. You'll be lucky if it makes $50,000. So they go back to the drawing board, they rewrite it from scratch. They're at a big pitch meeting, and people are just staring at them. Like, this movie doesn't make sense, I don't think anyone's gonna watch it. And a producer in the back of the room, Maureen Donnelly, shouts out, why don't you turn this into Hamlet? And in that moment, the movie gets the green light. It becomes the most successful film of 1994. You might have heard of it. It's called The Lion King. Now, I didn't realize there was a Lion King-Hamlet connection until one of the screenwriters told me this story. But what is remarkable about this story is the original pitch for The Lion King in that meeting was, I quote, Bambi in Africa with lions. Can you imagine being in that pitch meeting and you hear Bambi with Africa and lions, you'd be like, I have no idea what this movie's gonna be about, and I am terrified for Bambi. If you know your Shakespeare, though, when it gets reframed as Hamlet with lions, it starts to click, and you're like, oh, the uncle's gonna kill the father, and then the son's gonna have to avenge it. And now you can start to wrap your mind around the plot and the characters. And this is what I mean when I say make your unfamiliar idea feel familiar. If you can find an example of something that's worked in a different domain, in a different industry, in a different country, at a different university, it's way easier for people to say, instead of, that's crazy, maybe that's possible. And I had a chance to see this happen in real time. So my first class, I was teaching at Wharton. A student comes into my office and he says, I want to start a company to sell glasses online. Do you want to invest in it? And I was like, that's ridiculous. You can't buy glasses online. You have to go get your eyes tested, and then you have to, get fitted, and this is a really terrible idea. So I declined the investment, and now Warby Parker is worth over $1 billion. And my wife is really unhappy with me. And this is why, between that and the whole Facebook thing, no one should ever listen to me when it comes to original ideas, which is why I've spent a lot of time studying other people's efforts to be original. But what I got to watch then was a lot of people had the reaction that I did. Customers said, I'm not going to order glasses online. Potential investors, suppliers, they're like, no, this isn't going to work. And so then what they started doing was they said, we're going to do for glasses what Zappos did for shoes. And they got some early customers that way who were like, you know what, 5 years ago, I didn't used to order shoes online, and now I do that pretty regularly. And then they ended up getting called the Netflix for eyewear by GQ. And that just took off. Because some of you will remember, as I do, that experience of, remember on the weekend when you wanted to rent a movie, and you had to get in your car and drive to Blockbuster? And then you get home, you watch the movie, and after you're done watching it, you have to physically rewind it in your VCR to not get charged a late fee. We don't do that anymore. And as people started thinking about the way that the internet had transformed other businesses, they were kind of like, all right, maybe this could work for glasses too. Now, of course, you can take this too far. I have seen way too many startups do the Uber for X pitch, which is getting a little old. But I think there is power in this idea, right? The more you read outside of your immediate world, the more you know about what's going on elsewhere, the easier it is to build those kinds of bridges. And I think it's a good reminder that the breadth of our experience, how many different things we've encountered, is every bit as important for being creative as the depth of our experiences. So those are a couple things that I've learned about pitching ideas. Now, this only all works if you create an environment that has what's called psychological safety, where people believe they can take risks and try new things without getting punished. And I think this is easier said than done in a lot of places. So I've started taking pictures of different organizations as I go into them, just to get a snapshot of like the leaders who are shutting down ideas. What are they doing? And this is one of my favorite pictures that I've snapped. Now, a lot of people think that they're asking for ideas. They're like, yeah, I want people to be innovative and creative. But the words that come out of their mouth actually send the opposite message. And one of the ones that drives me crazy is, don't bring me blank, bring me blank. Think about a boss or a coach that you've had at some point in your career who's said that. And I'm going to ask you all to fill it in out loud. Ready? Don't bring me? Bring me? That was a little bit uncomfortably good. I get why bosses say this, because you want people to be constructive. You want them to solve problems, right? You don't want them to just complain and whine. But I think this is a dangerous statement, because if you create a world where people can only speak up when they know the solution, you're never going to hear about the biggest problems that are too hard for anyone to solve alone. You're also going to have a culture that's all advocacy, no inquiry, right? Where people are like, all right, I gotta go find the perfect solution and then shove it down everybody else's throat. As opposed to saying, here's a problem, I don't know what to do about it, I have some initial ideas, but I'd love to get some diverse people together to talk about how to fix it. So I actually love to see organizations make it safe just to talk about problems, even without solutions. This has been one of Warby Parker's greatest techniques, I think, for innovation. A lot of their big innovations have come out of something they just call the problem log. It's literally a Google Doc, where anytime you see something you think is a problem, you submit it there. And then senior leaders review it every week. They vote on which ones are most important. And if you want to fix one of those problems that's high in importance, you can just make that part of your job and build a team to do it. And it's a great way to sort of direct everybody's energy toward, okay, here's what we want to do. And if you don't do that well, then you will end up in a situation where you don't really hear about the issues that need attention. One of the most interesting examples of this that I've ever seen is at a company called Bridgewater. They're a hedge fund. They've been the most successful of any company in their industry for the past 40 years. They predicted the financial crisis in 2008. And they have a lot of unusual practices. One of the ones that I really like is they say, look, nobody has a right to hold a critical opinion without speaking up about it. Sort of the opposite of most places that I've been, where if you have a critical opinion, you have no right to speak up about it. And the way they make this real is, first of all, they believe that everyone should voice whatever their concerns and comments are. And so if you ever talk about someone behind their back, you actually get dragged right in front of them, and you're told to front stab them instead of backstabbing them, so that they can hear it directly from you. They also, in their performance reviews, they will evaluate you on whether you are criticizing your boss and your boss's boss. And they're like, look, you know what? You can get fired if you are not sufficiently critical of the people above you. And they believe that that's the best way to get dissent. Now, the culture got tested a few years ago. There was a guy, I'm going to call him Jim today because that's his name. Jim writes this email to Ray Dalio, the founder, and he says, Dear Ray, that meeting we were in today, I give your performance a D-. You rambled incoherently for over an hour. It was obvious that you didn't prepare, because if you had, this wouldn't have gone that way. This was really bad. It can't ever happen again. He went on for over a page like that. Now, I don't know about you. I personally would not send that email to the billionaire founder of my company. But Ray writes back, and he says, I'm sorry I let you down. And then he copies everyone else in that meeting, and he asks them to rate his performance on a scale from A to F. And let me tell you, he does not get any A's. And that's the kind of behavior that we need to create psychological safety, right? Where somebody gets criticized and says, please give me more of it. Please tell me what you really thought of how I was doing. And if you stop there, that's pretty unusual, but they go further. They copy the email trail to the entire company. And it's now a case that everyone who joins the organization reads and discusses to think about how to be that open to constructive criticism. One of the things I've learned from Ray is that every time you get criticized, what you want to give yourself is a second score. So Ray can't do anything about the D-, right? That already happened. He can't control it. The only thing he can control is how well he reacts to the D-. And he says, all right, even if I got a D- for my performance this morning, I'm going to aim for an A on how well I take that news. And I've found over and over again, every time I get critical feedback, reminding myself just to give myself that second score and say, all right, like how well do I do on really listening to it and learning from it, makes it a lot easier to take the stuff that stings. Now, I've watched some leaders and managers go even further with this. So this is Carolyn Everson. She works at Facebook. A while back, she got a performance review from her boss, outlining the things she was doing well, but also the areas she needed to improve. And she ended up taking that performance review and posting it in the Facebook group for her whole team, so that everyone she works with could read exactly what she's doing wrong and how she needs to improve. And I think, this is kind of strange. The size of the Facebook group is 2,400 people who work with her. So she just put it out there for over 2,000 people. And she wanted to send a message. She said, look, we're all works in progress, right? None of us are perfect. We're all trying to get better. If you know where I'm trying to get better, you will give me more honest feedback, more constructive criticism. You'll also be able to help me see what my blind spots are that nobody's even commented on yet. And I'd love to see more leaders doing that, right? I think we should all be more open with the feedback that we get. The only way to develop original ideas and to advance them is to have other people tell you the truth. So not long ago, some of our students got together at Penn, and they said, you know what? It'd be kind of fun if our faculty did a little bit of this. So we created a video. It was inspired by a performer that some of you will know. His name is Jimmy Kimmel. And this is what we came up with.
What suggestions do you have for the Wharton Leadership Program? Have someone more relevant than Jeff Klein lead it.
Professor Lowe should go first to some undergrad or lower profile MBA programs and train herself how to teach before coming to school as reputable and with so high student expectations as Wharton is.
This is possibly the worst class I've ever taken in my life. Fair enough.
One tries to accomplish too much at once and ultimately accomplishes nothing.
I mean, how embarrassing is it that we're being taught managing people at work by someone who's never managed anyone at work? That is ridiculous.
Pitkin can be so condescending. Yeah.
All I learned from Professor Singleton was how to bundle boring with difficult and to charge the price of an LT. I wouldn't even make a good bundle. You remind me of a Muppet.
Professor Bluen dresses like a 50-year-old librarian.
Why do you dress up so much for class? I understand wearing a suit, but the pocket square? It makes me question your maturity and cause me not to respect you as much.
This professor is a total He's a nice
Prof. Singleton acts all down with pop culture, but secretly thinks Ariana Grande is a font in Microsoft Word.
Instruction repeated on the other hand, and in other words, a lot. Thanks for that feedback. I really appreciated it. On the other hand, repairs. In other words,
I've got to tell you that every time I have shown that video in class, afterward, I get way better ideas and suggestions than I would have before. The one thing I've never gotten an answer to is which Muppet. I'll let you all try to gauge that. But in all seriousness, right, I think one of the best things you can do if you want other people to be comfortable trying their crazy ideas and giving honest feedback is to show that you don't take yourself too seriously, that you're willing to laugh at yourself. It just makes it a lot safer for people to try wild and crazy ideas. Now, the last thing that I want to highlight before we open it up for questions is I think if you want to build a culture of original thinkers, you need to have people who are givers, not takers. And I've been studying this dynamic my whole career, right? The takers are the people who are always trying to hog the interesting and visible and important roles, and then they dump all the grunt work on everybody else, but they still walk away with all the credit, which is why I know you all love working with takers, right? On the other end of the spectrum, we have people that I've come to think of as givers, right? And I think there is literally no better place on the planet than to find them than here at Butler, where selflessness, I know, is a huge part of what it means to join a team. And I think that givers are always the people who are asking, how do I make the team better, right? Whether it's like sharing my knowledge or mentoring more junior people or showing up early and staying late, right? My goal is to try to help and contribute as opposed to think about how I get ahead. And I really wanted to try to understand this better. And so this is not public yet, but for all of you who came today, part of the reason that I'm here is I'm starting a podcast with the folks who make the TED Talks on work life. And we're doing all kinds of different episodes on organizations that help us reimagine how we can collaborate and create. And we're doing an episode on the Butler basketball team, looking at how you all have built this amazing culture of givers. So we get to attend a practice tomorrow, and I'll be spending some time with some coaches and athletic directors, and cannot wait to see how this really works. I thought tonight I'd share a little bit about what I've learned about how you build these cultures of givers. And I'm assuming that everything I say you all already know, but in case there's something that you don't, here it is. I think the main reason, when it comes to original thinking and creativity, the main reason you want a culture of givers is we know creativity depends on people sharing their knowledge freely. We also know it depends on creative collisions, where people say, you two don't know each other, but you should. And then all kinds of new ideas connect that wouldn't have before. And takers don't do that, right? They hoard their knowledge, or they hide it. And they also tend to steal credit for other people's ideas, or shoot down ideas that are threatening to them. And so it's really hard to imagine new ideas flourishing in an environment where people are fundamentally selfish. So first, I wanted to give you all a chance to figure out if you are more of a giver or a taker. And I'm going to give you a test. The question is, how much do you like this individual? And the more you like this individual, the more likely you are to be a taker. Sorry, but we all know it's true. Now, here's my favorite taker test. Gotta tell you, those of you who haven't laughed yet, I'm a little worried about where you stand on that spectrum. No, I like this test because narcissists are one kind of taker, right? People with inflated, fragile egos who think if I want to win, everyone else has to lose. There's another kind of taker, though, that's more common. It's someone who used to be a giver and then got burned one too many times and learned the hard way that it's dangerous to be generous. So they don't mean to be cruel or cutthroat. They just say, look, a lot of the world is a dog-eat-dog competitive place. And if I don't put myself first, no one else will. And then there's a third kind of taker we won't be discussing tonight, and that's called a psychopath. But the other two kinds of takers, we can change them. We can shift the way they interact. And I want to just talk briefly about what I've learned about how to build cultures where people are givers. This is my favorite way. So it is really nice to have the right people on your bus. It's great to have givers on your team, but it's even more critical to keep the wrong people off your bus. The harm done by a taker is usually double to triple the good done by a giver. Think about it this way. One bad apple can spoil a barrel, but one good egg just does not make a dozen. I don't know what that means, but I hope you... Actually, I do know what it means. Look around the room for a second. I want you to find the most paranoid person you know here, and then I want you to point at that person to make them even more paranoid. Okay, don't actually do it. I'm just kidding. But if you are one of those paranoid people, one of the easiest ways to become that way is to work with or collaborate with a taker, right? Because it's not a delusion. They truly are out to get you. And if you let even one taker into a team, paranoia starts to spread, and the givers stop helping because they're afraid of the consequences. Whereas if you put one giver in a team, you don't get an explosion of generosity. More often, people are like, great, that person can do all the work. So what I like to think about first is how do we make sure that we don't let the worst takers possibly into our groups? And one of my favorite ways to catch a taker is to ask a question like the following. So it's right out of the IKEA playbook, which is, let's consider a taking behavior like theft. What % of people do you think steal at least $10 a month from their employers? Think about it for a second. How common is theft of at least $10 a month? Okay, we'll get a show of hands here. How many people are 0 to 20% guesses? Raise your hand. Okay, 21 to 40. 41 to 60. 61 to 80. 81 to 99. Okay, anyone for 100? All right, you realize that includes you, right? So take your results with a grain of salt, because if we were really trying to figure out if you were a taker, we'd give you a whole bunch of questions and try to look at your behavior patterns and see if there's a common pattern. But the data do show that the higher your estimate that other people are thieves, the greater the chances that you're a thief. So, I've got a pro tip tonight. If you're sitting near someone who has an 80% or higher estimate, I would check your wallet. No, look, there are lots of ways you could give a high estimate without being a taker or a thief, right? One of them is, like, you worked with a lot of thieves. Another is, it's your job to catch thieves. But the way that a lot of people answer this question is they start by asking themselves, well, what would I do? Or what have I done? And then they project that onto others. So an extreme taker, I'll caricature this for you, is like, let's see, what percent of people steal $10 a month? Because takers always talk like that. I don't know, last week I stole $374. I'm assuming 10 a month is pretty common. 94%. Whereas an extreme giver, answering the same question, is like, how do you even steal $10 from a company? Like, how many pens do you have to take home? It's about 400, by the way. But what kind of person would do such a thing? I don't know, like 3%. That's got to be rare. Notice how the giver sounds exactly like me, by the way? Because I ran out of voices after that Krusty the Clown, Oscar the Grouch hybrid. But no, what's interesting is in large samples, we do see often that these differences play out. The takers anticipate more selfish behavior from others, and that's how they rationalize and justify being a taker. It's not me. I believe that all of you people are selfish. So look, I'm just being smart and cautious and protecting myself. So if you want to catch a taker, what you do is you identify the taking behavior you are most worried about. It could be all kinds of selfishness. It could be, hiding your knowledge. It could be stealing credit for other people's work. It could be dumping work on others. And then you ask, how common do you think that behavior is? And when someone gives a high estimate, you give them a chance to explain. You ask, why? How did you come up with that? And there are lots of legitimate answers, right? As some of you were probably thinking, well, I actually know how many people are taking things that they want me to have pens, I swear, right? And so you just define theft more broadly, and that's fine. Well, the deadly answer, though, is when somebody says, I just believe that other people are fundamentally selfish, which is actually code for, hey, by the way, I'm fundamentally selfish. Only they don't realize that's what they're revealing. So you want to make sure you don't let in the worst takers to a team. A second thing that turns out to really matter is if you want a culture of givers, you need a culture of help seekers. People are willing to ask for help. You have a lot of frustrated givers who would love to be helpful if only they knew who could benefit and how. And if you create a norm where people are not embarrassed, where they're not vulnerable, where they feel like, it's okay to ask, then you give givers direction, right? They're like, oh, that's where I can step up and pitch in. And so my favorite way to do this is to run a little exercise called the reciprocity ring. It's a simple activity. You can all try it out anytime. All you do is you gather a group of people together who have diverse backgrounds or experiences or connections, and you invite them all to make a request for something they want or need but cannot get on their own. And then you challenge everybody else in the group to try to help them. And that's the whole exercise. Everybody asks, everybody gives. And you will see some pretty unusual requests. So one time we had this guy who said, my dream is to see a Bengal tiger in the wild. That's what you asked for, really? You could ask for anything. Why that? This guy's like, you don't understand. I was a tiger every year for Halloween as a kid. I root for all the sports teams with tiger in their name, even though I've never gone to any of those schools or lived in any of those places. I just always thought it would be cool to walk around with Bengal tigers. No one in the room had ever set foot on a continent where that was possible. But somebody raised a hand and said, I think I might have a lead for you. And about a month later, that guy got to fly out and do a private tour of a game preserve where he got to see his Bengal tigers in the wild. Now, unfortunately, the tigers got... No, I'm just kidding. But never would have happened, right, if you hadn't gathered these people and just said, hey, let's put all our requests out there. And I think when you do this exercise, there's some pretty cool effects. One is that the givers ask. Givers normally, they're like, nah, I don't want to ask. I like to be on the giving end of every exchange. But when everybody's making a request, they feel like it's sort of not compliant to not participate. And so they do. They still cheat often. They make a request on behalf of other people instead of themselves, which is not the point of the exercise, but I guess if you need a gateway drug to get to the hard stuff, so be it. So we get the givers asking, recognizing that, look, you need to be a receiver too, right? So that other people can have a chance to give. And then the other effect is that the takers step up and give. because all the giving is public. If you do it in a small group, the requests are out loud, and the takers are like, huh, if I don't offer to help everyone's going to know I'm a taker. I don't want to be known as a taker. If you do it in a large group, what we often do is we'll have people write their requests on a flip chart or a sheet of paper, and then you just put those around the room, and people can wander around and sign up. And again, takers don't sign up. They're going to get outed as takers. So we actually we studied this, we found that takers triple their contributions during this exercise relative to what they would normally give. So now the question is, do they actually follow up and deliver? I don't know. But I've been running this in my classroom for years because I want to get students in the habit of giving help, but also being willing to ask for it. And a few years ago, I got one of my all-time favorite requests. Student Alex says, my dream is to work at Six Flags Amusement Park. And I just think riding roller coasters is nirvana, but strangely, Six Flags does not recruit at most business schools. So, I don't know where to start. Does anybody know how to get my foot in the door? Another student says, I might have a sort of, maybe a connection for you. A few weeks later, I asked Alex for an update. And he says, you won't believe this. I just got off the phone with the former CEO of Six Flags. I'm like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my classroom. Did he give you a job? Did he connect you to other people in the industry? And Alex says the guy was extraordinary. He was so helpful, you will not believe what happened. And he breaks out in this big grin. He's like, I now know I never want to work in that industry. And I was depressed for a little while. But then I realized, you know what? Now that he ruled out that dream, he can go on to pursue other dreams. And I'm proud to announce that Alex went on to live one of those other dreams, gainfully employed as a management consultant. Who he promised me that one day he will fix the amusement park industry. But I think this simple step of getting people to ask for help, it really brings a lot of the givers out of the woodwork. It motivates the takers to contribute. And it's a great way to make sure that a lot of helping is happening. Now, there is a risk that givers never show up because they're too busy helping other people that they can't disengage from that and actually be where they're supposed to be. And I think one of the most critical things that happens if you want to build a culture of givers is you need to help them set boundaries. One of the easiest ways to do that is to think about the difference between sprinkling and chunking your giving. So sprinkling, imagine you're going to do 5 random acts of kindness this week. If you're assigned to sprinkle them, you do 1 each day, kind of spread them out. Chunking is the opposite. You pick 1 day each week, and you make that your giving day. And you say, that's when I'm going to do all 5 of these acts. The question is, which one is better for your mood? Which one gives you more energy? How many people think sprinkling is the way to go? You want to do a little bit of helping every day. Okay, how many people think chunking is the way to go? Okay, so only one group gets happier over 10 weeks when they do this every week. And it's the people who chunk, not the people who sprinkle. Yes, I know, I had that reaction too, except I guessed it wrong, so I didn't. But I think that what's interesting about this is most people, so I was sure that a little bit every day is what adds to your happiness. But the people who sprinkle their giving across the week, they don't get any boost in energy whatsoever. They don't end up more satisfied with their lives. And it seems to be that it's just a drop in the bucket, right? It's like I do a little bit every day, it doesn't add up to anything. And it's also kind of distracting from all the other things I'm trying to do. Whereas the people who pick 1 day as their giving day, that day they feel like they really made a difference and they had an impact. And they're also able to really focus during that time. They're not that worried about the other things that are on their plate. And I think it's really important, actually, to allow people to say, look, I'm going to block out my schedule to get my own stuff done, and I'm also going to try to reserve some windows to be really available and responsive to other people. Of course, that all flies out the window in an emergency. But I think that's something that makes it a lot easier to then say, look, I can be productive and ambitious toward my own goals. I can also be there to elevate people's success in their goals. And that's something that turns out to really matter. Now, I think something that throws a lot of people off when they think about givers and takers is they get confused by this personality trait called agreeableness. You will know agreeable people as warm and friendly, welcoming, polite, nice people. Disagreeable people, more critical, skeptical, and challenging, and also much more likely than their peers to go to law school. That's not a joke, by the way, that's an empirical fact. Sorry to the lawyers in the room, but it turns out, by the way, that law is one of the only known professions where highly disagreeable people dramatically outperform their peers, which is interesting, but not surprising. So look, I always assumed that agreeable people were givers and disagreeable people were takers. Because, if you're friendly and nice, you're also going to be helpful. And then I collected a bunch of data and found there was a zero correlation between those axes. Because agreeableness, disagreeableness is your outer veneer. How pleasant is it to interact with you? Whereas giving and taking are your inner motives. What are your underlying intentions toward others? So if you really want to understand people accurately, you've got to draw the 2 by 2. And you will find that there are 2 of these combinations that maybe are familiar and 2 that get overlooked. You do not want to waste your time on the disagreeable takers. They are not to be trusted. Now, I've made the mistake over and over again of assuming that agreeable people were givers and then finding out later they were takers. Like my boss's boss. When I came to her and said, hey, we got to save this guy's job. He's coming up on this big deadline. And she'd always been nice in the past, but it turned out she was all about herself, and I didn't see that. And it's really bad to take ideas to those people because they will either reject them or they will steal them. And so you don't want to end up in that boat. Now, the other mistake that a lot of us make is when we have a new idea, when we have a suggestion, we take it to the agreeable givers because we expect them to be great cheerleaders. And they are in that conversation. But the problem is agreeable people hate conflict. And they don't want to rock the boat. And so they're terrible advocates for ideas that are unpopular, unproven, unfamiliar. And so they're not necessarily the people you most want to go to. Now, the last combination is the most valuable and most overlooked one. The disagreeable givers. Those are the people who are gruff and tough on the surface, but underneath they have others' best interests at heart. And if you're having trouble thinking of a disagreeable giver, just take it from a colleague who works at Google who said, oh, disagreeable giver, that's like somebody with a bad user interface but a great operating system. I'm like, if that helps you, sure. But these are our most undervalued colleagues and friends and family members because they are the ones who give us the critical feedback we do not want to hear, but we need to hear. They are the ones who challenge the status quo, who love fighting the uphill battle. And so if you can take a new idea to them, they will tear it apart, right, in service of making it better. And if you can get them excited about it, they will run through walls for you, right? Because they crave that fight. Now, not only will they work harder to get an idea heard, they will also be more credible advocates. Because if you find somebody who's really disagreeable and they're championing your idea, people will be like, wow, Fred has literally never liked an idea in his entire career here. Like, if he likes this one, it must be really good. And so those are the people that you want. In fact, there's a study that I loved where highly disagreeable people, it turns out, they experience more joy in an argument than a friendly conversation. So those are the people that you want fighting for you. And, of course, look, like if that's who you can be, those of you who are highly disagreeable, the challenge is to make sure that the disagreeable doesn't overshadow the giving. And too often we will write people off by saying, kind of prickly, must be a selfish taker. And I think the prescriptive implications of this are very clear. So look, I have a simple goal when I work with groups and teams, which is I want to create cultures where we have more original thought. And I think to do that, we need to create environments where people can talk about the worst features of their ideas, not just the best, where they don't have to repeat them over and over again to get people to take them seriously. But they can just say, yeah, you know what, there's some real possibilities here. Where it's safe to challenge other people and criticize them and disagree. And to do that, you want your disagreeable givers, right? That's where ideas really tend to flourish. And I think you all here at Butler are in the best possible position to do that because you have literally the embodiment of a disagreeable giver who happens to be your mascot. And I think that there's no better place to build that culture than here. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm Michelle Jarvis, Associate Provost. I'm so excited to be here and that you're here. I'm really excited to be part of this One Butler team. Woo! But more about that in a minute. Adam is so very gracious. He's going to take our questions. We have some strategic microphones placed on each side here on the main floor. I think there's another one upstairs. So if you make your way to the microphone, we'll start with question and answer. But
Let's
if
do
you
it.
don't hurry, I'm going to have to do my latest song and dance for you. I'm kidding. So.
Hi, Adam. Can you share examples of great cultures that you have observed and studied that we could learn from?
Yeah, so one of my favorite ones is IDEO. How many people are familiar with IDEO? Okay, a bunch of you. So they made the mouse for Apple, and they've done a lot of highly innovative design work. And after they started sort of getting known for this work, they got invitations to do really weird projects, like, can you please redesign our shopping carts in a grocery store from scratch? And they're like, our design experts don't know anything about shopping carts. Like, how are we going to do this? And they realized that they were too narrow in how they thought about like what it meant to be creative, and they thought design thinking was the solution, but they needed some other skill sets too. So they started to diversify, and they said, well, who's good at going to these like different environments and making sense of them? And they said, anthropologists. That's what anthropologists do for a living. And so they actually created a new job title called anthropologist. They hired people with that background who would kind of go in and then translate and make sense of it. And after a while, they were like, this is amazing. We should only hire anthropologists. And then they're like, wait, we're falling in the same trap that we did before. And the lesson they took from that is, I think that way too many organizations focus on cultural fit, right? They want to know, like, do you live our values? Do you breathe our mission? And if not, you don't really belong here. And that works really well when you're like an early stage startup or a small team. The problem is, though, as you grow and as the world changes, cultural fit becomes sort of a great way to get groupthink. Because it means, like, are you similar to me? Do I want to hang out with you? Do we want to have drinks, right? And then you end up sort of weeding out diversity of background and experience and thought, which is really bad for creativity and innovation and change. And so what they say is, look, we want cultural contribution, not cultural fit. Instead of asking, like, what is our culture and how do we clone that and replicate it, we need to ask what's missing from our culture. And then how do we bring in and promote and value people who enrich it by offering something that's absent? And I think that is a brilliant model. Right? And I think that's why this idea of being a giver or of selflessness or a service, as you would call it in the Butler way, is so important, because those are the people who are always thinking about how to make cultural contributions, right? And asking, like, what can I give? What can I share? What can I contribute? And I love that as an example. I'm happy to ramble about others, but I would love to take more questions if there are them.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for your talk today. It's funny, I should actually see you today because I just listened to a podcast about failure is an option. So today must be a day for me to accept failure. My question is, I'm going to use old companies or old corporations versus new corporations, right? So I'm talking about the tech industry as the new corporations, and other industries like stuff that's been there for like since the Industrial Revolution. With a lot of the stuff you say is more prevalent in these newer companies, right? The tech companies and things like that. When you look at the other companies that have been there for about 100 years, you don't see the culture. And a lot of the examples you gave, it was somebody higher up. It was a leader talking about, hey, let me embrace my failure, and so everybody else follows, right? But what happens when you're in a organization where that's not the case, right? The leaders are not the ones getting it, right? It's somebody in the middle management or working class folks that actually are getting exposed to these ideas and want to kind of push that up, right? So what are your suggestions on how to better do that?
I don't know, I just study this stuff, good luck. I'm just kidding, mostly. Honestly, I think this is really hard. Let me take 3 cracks at it. The first one is, there's a great book called Switch by the Heath brothers. It's the best book I've ever read on bottom-up and kind of middle-driven change. And it's all about when change is hard, when you don't have the authority or the resources to drive it, like, what do you do? And frankly, most of what I know about kind of driving change from below comes from Switch. So that would be my first suggestion. Second thought is, one of the most effective things you can do if you don't have power, but you have ideas, is you can get good at advice seeking. So what I would do is I would go to my boss or some senior leader in that organization, and I would say, hey, I have this idea. I would love your guidance about how to pursue it. And the research says 2 things will happen then. The first one is that you flatter that person. We all love to be asked for advice. Makes us feel important, right? To paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, we all admire the wisdom of people who come to us for advice. Let's face it, they have good taste. They knew to come to me, right? And then the second thing is that in order to give advice, that person has to take your perspective. They have to walk in your shoes. And so by the time they've kind of thought about, like, why would you want to get this idea across? Like, why is it important? They usually appreciate it a little bit more. So you put those two things together, in a worst case scenario, what will happen is this person will say, you know what, like, here are some people that you should talk to. Best case scenario is they actually step up and become your advocate, which happens in some of these cases. And so, I think just going in and saying, look, I know you're really good at understanding like how things get done here and how ideas get implemented. I don't want to waste your time with this, but I'd love your suggestions on how to pursue it and who else to talk to. Kind of gives you some license to do it that way. And then the third thing that I would say is, I think that in every group, in every organization, there are bright spots, right? There are pockets of people who have ideas and who are willing to champion them. One of the most unexpected places I've seen this actually is in the US military. So I serve on this innovation board in the Department of Defense, and they're like, we're going to bring people who know nothing about military work and try to figure out how we can innovate for national security. And they had a group of junior aviators who got together and said, you know what, like senior people don't get it. They're still running computers on Windows 95. Like, in a world of like artificial intelligence, like this is not going to bode well for any of us. And so what they did was they started testing out some ideas together. And then they started going to their middle managers and asking, like, who are those people that are insubordinate, but are, like, insubordinate in a good way? Like, wait, that's an oxymoron. But eventually they started getting some names, and they identified some of those people who had real track records of innovation, and they started seeking their counsel and their support. And pretty soon, they got the chief of naval operations in the military to sponsor this group called the CRIC, which was basically a rapid innovation cell. And they now had cover, they had support to be able to get this done. And they never would have been able to do it alone, right? But building the coalition of like-minded people, they called themselves constructive contrarians, right? They were people who were always saying, like, this is bad, but it's bad because, like, I care and I want to make it better. I think those people in numbers have incredible power, and they really are difficult to shut down. So I would say you want to look for those people. Others? Is there one?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for being here. So, question for you, having studied give and take and originals, the intersection between the two I think was really interesting, what you brought tonight. With givers especially, I think people that want to give sometimes feel exhausted by the amount that they give. How do you recommend that people give in a more meaningful way so that it truly contributes to true innovation?
Interesting. Thank you for reading. I've struggled with this question, to be honest. I think that the way that I've become most comfortable thinking about it is to say that the big mistake that a lot of givers make is that they're only reactive, right? They love to respond when somebody needs help, and they're great at showing up in those situations. What they don't do is think about, well, where can I have the biggest impact? Like, what is my distinctive contribution that other people can't do? And that means being more proactive, right? And saying, like, okay, what are the unique skills that I have? What are the forms of giving that I really enjoy and excel at? So that when I do it, it's energizing and sort of effective as opposed to exhausting. And I think the most interesting example that I've seen of this is somebody I've had a lot of fun writing about. His name is Adam Rifkin. Adam was named Fortune's Best Networker because he had more connections to powerful people on LinkedIn than anyone on the planet, even the CEO. Which is kind of hard to do because the CEO owns all your accounts. And what Adam ended up sort of experiencing was he's a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. He got this reputation for being both innovative and helpful. And pretty soon he was bombarded with emails that went like this. Dear Adam, I know we've never met, but I'm wondering if you could read my business plan. It's only 272 pages, and then please meet with me for coffee. And Adam was averaging about 800 emails a day, and like he did not have time to do this, nor did he feel like he had anything to contribute on business plans. He loves technology, he loves people. And so he sits down and he says, all right, I gotta be more strategic, not in like how do I get more out of my giving, but rather like how do I give more? Like I need to plan this and take charge of it. And so what he realizes is his favorite thing to do is make introductions. He loves connecting two people who could help each other but don't know each other. And what's great about that is like oftentimes an introduction is a 5-minute favor. It doesn't require 20 hours of work. So he wakes up the next morning and he sets the goal. He says, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make 3 introductions every day. between two pairs of strangers. And he does that the next day, he does it every day that week, and he goes on to do that for over a decade, every single day. And he ends up making over 12,000 introductions. Just a quick back of the envelope count, we found over 6 companies that were started because he was able to get a business person, their technical co-founder, or vice versa. And then, what a great way to fuel creativity without having to do any work. He's like, if I can connect the dots, those people will go and create some really cool stuff. And what's interesting is, as he started doing this, the business plan requests stopped coming. Because before, he just had a reputation as a nice guy, you could harass him for anything. But then he gets known as a great connector. And why would you bother Fortune's best networker for business plan feedback when the most valuable resource he can give you is an introduction? And so I think if you're thoughtful about your giving, right, if you specialize as opposed to being a jack of all trades and say, look, here are the 2 forms of giving that I want to focus on, you get known more specifically for that, and what people come to you for is what you like to do and where you have a lot of value to add. And so I think that's probably the best advice that I would give to an exhaustive giver. Did that answer your question? Any others?
Yes, thanks very much for coming tonight, Adam. No, I enjoyed your talk quite a bit. I know there's quite a few faculty members here in the audience tonight, and talking about building culture, and a perfect microcosm of that is the classroom on a daily basis. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of these practices you implement in your classroom. And then my other question is talking about building a culture versus maintaining a culture. As the leader in the classroom, is it something where you're the leader, or are you actively working with those students to build it up every semester?
Yeah, I think I can answer those actually together. I'll try at least. So first of all, how many faculty members in the room? Okay, thank you all. I think this is I've heard rave reviews from students already about how giving faculty members are here. And I really admire that. And I think there's nothing more important on earth, but I'm biased because I'm one of you. And then, so I guess what I would say about this is I think that one of the trickiest things for me in the classroom has been trying to figure out how to get students to have a chance to have original ideas. So I teach a class on evidence-based management, and for years what I've done is I said, look, my job is to teach you what the best data say, so that instead of making stuff up, right, or just relying on your intuition or your gut, you would know, here's what works for most of the people most of the time in a situation like this, and then you could ask, how similar is my situation to that, and you'd be more informed. And I'm writing originals, and I'm like, I'm kind of a hypocrite. I'm asking people to have their own ideas, and I don't do that in my own classroom. And so what I ended up doing was, I said, all right, I don't want to do this at the very beginning of the semester because I actually do believe that what I'm teaching the students matters, and I want them to learn the stuff. But I also want them to challenge it and question it and think critically about it. So I created a new assignment a couple years ago. In November of a fall semester, I asked the students to team up in pairs and to film a mini TED Talk. And it had to disagree with something they learned in class, or somehow go against the grain on course topics. And I've got to tell you, I was blown away by the creative ideas, not just in the talks themselves, but the ways they delivered talks, formats that I'd never seen before. And I was like, oh, there's all this creative potential in the classroom, and I was stifling it. And so that got me curious then about, well, what else do the students have in terms of ideas and thoughts that I'm not getting? And so then what I did the next year was I left one of the class sessions blank. And the syllabus is just empty. It says, come to class, you have no idea why. Maybe I'm just not going to go that day. But they show up, and I said, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to do a class on speaking up with creative ideas. And you're going to design a class session. And whatever you design, we will do that class at the end of the semester. So we're going to have students divided into teams. You're going to pitch your ideas, and then you can vote. And the best idea the first year was they said, we should have one of the students, Lauren McCann, she said, we should have a Dear Penn Freshman initiative. What's that? She said, well, there's a lot of bad advice that we get when we're freshmen. And I think as a senior, I would now say very different things than what I was told. And what if we got all the seniors to write letters about what they wish they knew when they arrived at college? And so the class loved this idea. She organizes it. And we get dozens and dozens of letters within about 10 hours. And then she just puts them up on a little website. And it got I think it got 12,000 hits in the first day alone. And then other schools started doing it. I was like, this is incredible. We should just have the students design every class. So then sadly, I didn't have enough class sessions left to fit it in. But the next year we did it again. And the students said, well, we should have passion talks. Because everyone in this classroom is interesting and original in some ways, but we don't get to know that. And part of this class is about like discovering what motivates you, and that's how we study organizational behavior. So let's try to put that on the table. And so we held a class session where anyone who wanted to could sign up to do a 1-minute talk about something they loved. And again, floored. There was a student who came in and taught us all how to beatbox. Most of us. I did not learn. But some people did walk away with some skills there. There was another student who kind of like opened up about this passion for scuba diving, and then ended up organizing like a small group trip in class to do that. And I just watched these students bond around things that they learned about each other they never would have known, despite some of them knowing each other for years. So then after that, the students said, well, you should just do this with the whole class next year. And so this semester, I've tried it for the first time. Every class session, we have 3 students who stand up and give a 1-minute passion talk. And I just walk away so inspired and energized by the passion these students have. Like, I just want the whole class to be watching their passion talks. I'm going to stop teaching now. But I think giving them voice and ownership over the culture and the design of the class that way, I've learned a ton. And I think that it's involved them in some really meaningful ways too. So I'm a huge fan of doing that. The last thing that I'll put on the table is I've been worried for a long time that we do not have a culture of givers at Penn. I think Wharton is notorious for like attracting and socializing students who are going to be like Gordon Geckos and be like, greed is good. And so I wanted to do something about that. And one year the students tried to cancel my final exam. And they were like, one student actually stood up. His name was Jeremy Hurwitz. And Jeremy stood up and he's like, you've taught us persuasion and negotiation. And I'm going to, in the next few minutes, persuade you and negotiate with you to eliminate our final. I'm like, uh-oh, this is happening now. What do I do? And he gave his pitch. It was brilliant. And I was like, look, I find this really persuasive. There's only one problem. Like, I taught you to focus on interests, not positions. And my underlying interest here is that I want you to learn this material because I believe in it. And I know we have good data on this, that if you have to take an exam, you will study harder, you will internalize these concepts, and hopefully you will use them in your life. If you can find another way to do that, let me know. And they were like, oh. So the exam was going to happen, but they were terrified of like a curve. And so I made a commitment to the students, which I said, I will never have a grading curve hurt you. What I will do is I'll find out what like the highest score is, and then however far that is from a perfect score, I'll add those points to everyone's grade. But I want to go a step further. I want to encourage you to learn from each other. We know the best way to learn something is to teach it. And so let's see if we can facilitate that. Hardest part of my exam is the multiple choice section. You can take the hardest multiple choice question and write down the name of someone in the classroom who you think knows the answer. If you don't. If they get it right, you get their points too. Now, this is only 2 points on like a 150-point exam. Within 2 days, I had an email forwarded from one of the students saying, by the way, I've never seen this happen in my entire college career, but there is an email list that's been created of the entire class where they divided up all the course concepts. Everybody signed up to master one of them, so we know whose name to write down. And I was like, this is incredible. Like they're learning together, they're helping each other, they're supporting each other. But it went a step further. The class mean score, not accounting for those 2 points, went up by about 3% that year. So they actually learned more from studying together. And then I did it again the next year, and they went up by another 2 percentage points. And so, I just walked away from that thinking there's so much we could do as faculty to encourage students to help each other, to learn from each other, to support each other. And it did not take a big incentive, right? I didn't say half of your test depends on collaborating with somebody else. All I did was, eventually I realized I just took away the disincentives to being a giver. And said like, hey, this is not going to hurt you, and on the margin it will help you a little bit, and then they really responded. So there are probably way more things we could do to unleash that generosity, and I think you all here at Butler probably know how to do that a lot better than I do. I would love to hear if anybody has ideas. Anyone else before we wrap for tonight? Yes?
We've all obviously come here for face-to-face interaction, and you seem to, that's a preferred mode for you, it sounds like as well. You're a very positive, very creative person. And obviously there's tons of benefits to technology that you've discussed in your class, but what have you seen that you worry about in some of our changing culture as it becomes more mechanized, and how does that interact with the human factors?
I think a lot of people are worried about millennials. And I want to tell all of those people, most of whom are not millennials, that you were like that too once upon a time, because most generational differences in fundamental values and traits are really actually just age differences. And so I wouldn't overreact to the trends that we're seeing. Of course, the use of technology has changed in ways that some people are rightfully worried about. I will say in the classroom, the most important thing that I think I've done is we have an unplugged policy. So there are no digital devices in my class. And I usually tell the students there are 3 reasons to do this. Number one, it's really distracting to your classmates when they see you like on Facebook. And inevitably, even if you don't mean to, you will be on Facebook if your laptop is there. I will watch you, like I'll walk behind you during class, and like you're like, I just have to open it and see what's there. I can't help it, I'm sorry. Number 2, we actually have better memories when we write stuff down than when we type. There are a bunch of experiments on this. It turns out the pen is mightier than the keyboard in terms of etching stuff in your brain, which is good. And then number 3, if we're going to have a device, I want it to serve a purpose for class. And so we do a few activities in class that are actually sort of digitally driven. But other than that, there's really nothing in my classroom that requires an electronic connection. And what's so surprising about this is the number of students who have thanked me and actually said that they would pay someone to take their devices away in critical situations. Since I started that policy, there have been some really crazy experiments coming out, one of which showed that if you put 2 people in a room together and you just put a cell phone on the table in between them, even if it's not on or in use, they have less of a meaningful connection, less rapport, because each of them is like, I really feel like I'm missing something important. There might be a text coming in right now, and they don't engage in the discussion the same way. More recently, there was an experiment showing that if you put a cell phone on a desk and have people take memory and intelligence tests, their working memory drops by about 10% and their fluid intelligence drops by 5%. Again, there's a little bit of distraction from like, I know the phone is there. And the funny thing is, if you put it in a backpack, they still perform worse on memory and intelligence tests than if it's in another room, because they're kind of thinking about it even if they're not using it. And so I think those kinds of patterns are what worry me, but I don't think it's hard to set boundaries, right, and get that stuff out of the way. And I think we could probably all do a better job at that, right? Like, I know my wife and I, like, it took us a couple of years before we said, like, all right, you know what? Like, no phones at the dinner table. Like, our kids don't have tablets at the dinner table, right? Like, we're just going to focus on family time. And once they get into the rhythm, it just becomes a habit, and I think we could probably do that in the classroom, too.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I just say, it's been a huge honor to have a chance to share ideas with you tonight. I can't wait to learn from Coach Jordan and the players and Coach Collier and so many others. I want to thank President Danko especially for making this happen. And I also really want to thank Melissa, who is a huge, huge giver and has been extraordinarily helpful and responsive. And thank you all for living this Butler way.
Share a few words about our project. One Butler is our platform for Butler students, faculty, staff, alumni, community, friends, all of us to come together so we can explore and engage in our one theme, creativity. We have the opportunity to foster our creative process so we can think, act, work differently. We can learn about our imaginations and embrace original ideas so that we can unleash our creative possibilities and potential. Won't it be exciting to discover the link between creativity and innovation? I just think that's such exciting times. So if this interests you, I think you're going to receive more information about One Butler Creativity because you're here tonight. But I also know this. You can visit our website, butler.edu/onebutler, and events, activities, guest speakers, everything will be announced there. So you'll have to stay tuned, visit often, and come back again. I can't think of a better launch for our project, One Butler Creativity. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
See you, Biff. Take care.